Was Raheem Morris justified in his clock mismanagement in Week 17? Let's break it down.
You are Locked On Falcons, your daily Atlanta Falcons podcast. Part of the Locked On Podcast Network, your team every day.
Welcome back, everyone, to another illustrious episode of the Locked On Falcons podcast, your daily Atlanta Falcons podcast, part of Locked On Sports Atlanta, your team every day. And today's episode, I am joined by an illustrious guest. He is none other than Allen Strk, and he's going to talk with us about the Atlanta Falcons Week 17 loss to the Washington Commanders. He was on hand in Washington to cover this game for the Falcoholic, the SB Nation website for the Atlanta Falcons. And we'll talk about Raheem Morris's mismanagement and his excuse, I guess you could say, or response that he came up with on Monday to justify it. We'll talk about that. We'll talk about Michael Penix in his second NFL performance. We'll talk about the Falcons getting allegedly outplayed in the second half of this game and get some tidbits from Allen as well from, what he heard from the players in the locker room after this disappointing, heartbreaking loss to the Commanders in Week 17. But before we get into that, I do want to thank each and every one of you that is an everydayer of this podcast. It makes this podcast your first listen each and every day. And all you have to do to become an everyday or subscribe or follow for free on YouTube or wherever you listen to podcasts. So, Alan, before we jump into Raheem Morris, I forgot to introduce myself. I'm the very humble host, Aaron Freeman. Been covering the Falcons for almost 2 decades, formerly at FalcFans.com, RIP. Still going strong in this illustrious podcast. So, Alan, my friend, Raheem was given the business for some highly questionable clock mismanagement at the end of the first half and the second half in the Falcons' 30-24 overtime loss to the Washington Commanders. Didn't really have a opinion post game in the sense of other than I messed up. And then on Monday it came with a much more thorough reasoning behind why they didn't call the timeouts. They were hoarding timeouts at the end of both of those halves. That could have potentially allowed the Falcons to put more points up at the end of the half and at the end of regulation. But what were your thoughts to Raheem's response on Monday about the mismanagement at the end of the first half and regulation?
I mean, I appreciate that he went in a very detailed response because I don't think you see too many coaches give that thorough response. I think you can understand, given the familiarity with Dan Quinn and Joe Witt, why – given that they were going to bring different pressures. And you saw in the second half, Washington was starting to get, whether it was more twists or even a couple of simulated pressures, they were starting to generate pressure. And the Falcons were more comfortable stopping them with just pure four-man rush. So I kind of get what he said, where he was going with it, but it's still unjustifiable. It's obviously wrong, and he admitted he was wrong. So I like the accountability, and I do think you kind of look at, from his point of view, see where he was going with it. But ultimately, a coach with this experience, because it's not just from a head coaching standpoint, let's reaffirm for everybody, he learned from Monty Kiffin. He learned from that coaching tree with Mike Shanahan. Obviously, he learned with Dan Quinn, with Sean McVay. He's coached with some John Gruden as well. He's learned from some of the best. So he's almost 30 years of coaching experience. Some of the best coaches get it wrong. Andy Reid could get it wrong. Mike Tomlin could get it wrong. We've seen Sean McVay, everyone's favorite, Kyle Shanahan, get it wrong when it comes to clock management. These mistakes happen. It just proved to be at the worst possible time. And it's going to happen. But whether he needs to hire a clock management specialist, maybe that could work. But I think it is refreshing to have a coach give a thorough response to something that was controversial, because to me, he could have just been pretty what's the word I'm looking for, Aaron, here?
I don't know what word you
focus on. He could just brush off the media. He just been totally. Maybe we're not entitled to a response. He could have just said, "Look, it was my decision. That's it." I think he could have been much more aggressive compared to a little bit more thoughtful, I guess I could say. I can't think of the adjective that comes to mind. So I'm not admired, but I do appreciate that at least he gave his opinion out there. Could he have made it worse? Fine, but I'd rather have a coach that's more direct, and maybe it's coming from a media standpoint. Since I was there, I could appreciate him actually taking the time to give people a thorough explanation rather than just a 10-word response and just go somewhere else. Like, let's actually hear your thought process of what happened and how are you going to improve upon it, because going forward, he cannot make these kinds of mistakes if this team's going to contend in the future.
Okay. My thoughts are, I generally agree with you. My general philosophy on clock management is that it tends to get overblown by folks. I mean, it obviously proved costly in the moment, but like, to me, it's not one of those things that I particularly think about too often, because, as you said, I think every coach deals with these issues from time to time. As you mentioned, Andy Reid was like infamous for 20 years of being one of the worst clock managers in the NFL. Bill Belichick mismanaged the clock in the Super Bowl, and if not for the controversy surrounding Marshawn Lynch not getting the football, like, that would have been the leading story in that Seahawks Super Bowl coming out of that. So it happens to everybody. As you said, your goal as a head coach is to minimize the times it happens to you. So hopefully we'll see, what adjustments, what new protocols, or whatever you want to call it, that Raheem goes through. They do have someone specifically for that job to help them with that. Tim Burbinik, I think, is his name. So we'll see what adjustments they make for that moving forward. But I agree with you in the sense of, from a human perspective, all you can really ask another human when they make a mistake is to own up to their mistakes and explain to you why they made the mistakes. But I know for 99% of the people listening to this podcast or watching this podcast, like, they don't think about these things from a human perspective, and it's just like, fire him. And
yeah, like, you could explain yourself and still admit you're wrong. That's the thing. I don't know what the thought process is, but some people just like, you can't. I don't want to hear it. It's just like, okay, you can go into the explanation. Just because you're explaining doesn't make you right. Like, when you talk about the different pressures they were bringing in, certain little coverages, because there's so much history there between Raheem Morris and Dan Quinn. So when he was going into detail about it, it's like, okay, I can see why he thought about rushing it, but at the same time, it's just like, I get from the fans' point, or just everyone else, it's like, you have a rookie quarterback, second game, hostile crowd. Wow, that Washington crowd was on fire. And at that point, and let's not forget, you also have a kicker who is pretty inexperienced. Like, Riley Patterson got cut, I would say, 2 weeks before the Lions won their playoff run last year. Like, he is someone that fell out of favor there. So, I know he almost hit the 56-yard, but he's not someone that you could bank on. So, there's plenty of moving factors where it's just like, okay, we know this was the wrong decision. But I think we could still appreciate the fact that Morris gave at least his side, and you just want to see improvement in that area. And I think he's someone that could take the steps. He's someone that's very open-minded, because look, even though he was trying to deflect it maybe a little bit late Sunday night, he ultimately, when he said probably, I was like, okay, by tomorrow he's going to say 100% he's wrong. He's saying probably right now because he's trying to save face, but look, he'll admit to it, and he did. So I think just with coaching, and definitely want to hear your perspective, is like, you want to maximize the probability in these situations of winning, and he did the total opposite. And I think that's the biggest concern here. And I'm trying to think of any other instances, and maybe if you can remember, but were there any other glaring blunders he had when it came to time management this year? And nothing really.
There was a couple of times early in the season where I felt like they didn't use their timeouts well at the end of the first half, I think, but I don't think anything as egregious as this past Sunday night's one. It was just more like, we let 8 seconds bleed off the clock instead of 20 or something like that.
Yeah, that something comes to mind, because I think his decision making, particularly on fourth down earlier in the year, was really good, man. I think at one point the Falcons were like fourth in the league in fourth down conversion rate. Although, funny enough, the Commanders are first, which goes to show you how much that made a difference. But it's frustrating because we know his experience. Even though he might be limited as a head coach, he's still someone that should know better. So once again, I think we can understand the thought process, but we are not justifying it by any means. Like, this was wrong, it's going to cost the team a playoff spot. I don't know if people watch anything of the Saints Raiders. Unfortunately, I watched some of it because I was in DC and they had the game on the big screen. I know that 1 o'clock slate was brutal, but for a reason they had the Saints Raiders game on. And oh man, the Saints, that's one bad football team. So I'm about 99% sure, Aaron, that this did cost them a playoff spot. And look, you're gonna have to live with that, but you have to view it as a minor setback that leads to major growth. I think we can talk more about later. But that's how Drake London looked at it coming out of that game. Just minor setback. It looks like a colossal setback now because 7 years without the playoffs is just hard for any fan base to digest, and I could totally understand that. But you gotta be an optimist somehow.
I guess, those words have never come out of my mouth, but I guess speaking of optimism, let's talk about Michael Penix's second NFL start, and I'm curious to get your thoughts on it. I went back and watched the film on Monday, and it was a little underwhelming, but we'll see sort of what your thoughts on it as we continue today's Locked On Falcons. So Locked On has been very good to me these past couple of years, getting a little bit more money in my pocket, and I'm trying to do the most to maximize how much money stays in my pocket. And that's a big reason why I signed up with Rocket Money to help me monitor my spending. Rocket Money is the personal finance app that's going to help you monitor your spending. It's also going to help find and cancel your unwanted subscriptions and even help lower your bills so that you can grow your savings. It brings everything together in one place, whether it's subscriptions, spending habits, or even the goals that you want to hit this year in 2025. Rocket Money has over 5 million users and has saved a total of $500 million in canceled subscriptions, saving members up to $740 a year when using all of the app's premium features. Canceling the subscriptions is a big selling point for Rocket Money, and you quickly find out how much that $740 adds up when you find $5 here or $8 here or $20 there. It all adds up. So cancel your unwanted subscriptions and reach your financial goals with Rocket Money. Go to rocketmoney.com/lockedon today. That's rocketmoney.com/lockedon, rocketmoney.com/lockedon. So Alan, let's talk about Michael Penix. And what are your thoughts on his performance in his second NFL start?
So let's just know I have not watched all 22 yet. So Aaron, I definitely want to hear your insight on it because you did watch the film. And I think that's always a great way to assess a quarterback's performance, but it definitely was uneven. There were several throws that were just completely off target, especially on outbreak. It was weird. Like there were some plays, particularly the throws to Drake London, whether it be from the slot or even on the outside, where he was throwing outside of numbers that were just beautifully thrown in stride. But then there are other throws where it just nowhere near catchable. And it seemed like when there was times where he had to throw off platform, you saw the inaccuracy show. While when he was in rhythm, in structure, you really saw that that quick release. And that's probably one of my favorite things from watching Penix so far. It's just that real quick release, the velocity he throws with like that roughing the passer. That doesn't happen without a quick release. Okay, it was kind of a cheap penalty, but it was one of those crafty moments where just like that unblocked pressure from maybe it was Dante Fowler coming from the left side, and just those moments, you need it's like those little savvy veteran plays you want to see from a rookie quarterback. It was great to see, but the accuracy, it's going to be a work in progress. I do think he's processing well, but there were definitely times where just the rhythm wasn't there, and it was to be expected. I mentioned before, it was a hostile environment, and we know that he's not the most accurate quarterback, and throwing. It's always good. Like throwing those tight windows can be a little tricky, especially given that the Falcons, the chemistry hasn't been quite there. And I do think the route distribution was a little bit kind of generic. Maybe Zach Robinson hasn't quite opened the playbook yet. Just from watching live, I just didn't think the routes were all that creative. But overall, I think Penix definitely he definitely needs to be more accurate, and the timing definitely has to come down. Because that interception, do you think that ultimately came down to just time being off between him and Blair?
Yeah, I think that was just, Blair running a different route and Penix throwing a different route, basically. I think, those two guys just weren't on the same page, which you kind of expect from a young quarterback. So, I thought it was an up and down performance. I thought, late in the game, in the final 4 minutes in regulation, you saw sort of, the best of Michael Penix during that time. But I think the first 56 minutes of the game, it was much more up and down, and he made some good throws in that time, but he was also very spotty. And, the Falcons' efficiency throwing the football was not there for 3.5 quarters. And, I don't think Penix played poorly. He looked like a rookie to me. And again, that kind of contrasts how he looked last week. And as you said, I think some of that is to be expected. I've talked about this elsewhere on Locked On Sports Atlanta, sort of where you think about the sort of parallels between Michael Penix's first 2 starts and Matt Ryan's first 2 starts, where Matt Ryan looked really great against a terrible Lions team that went 0-16 that year. And then the following week on the road against a quality Bucs team that won the division the previous year, started that game 0-9 and finished that game, I think 13 for 33 or something like that. And you kind of saw a similar thing with Penix, beating up on a bad Giants team last week at home, and then going on the road against a playoff team in Washington, and, being a little bit more erratic. And so, I hope no one hears me being critical of Penix and thinks, well, that's just Aaron hating because, he wanted them to keep playing Kirk Cousins and all that stuff. But it is just one of those things where I do feel like, I think he came back down a little bit to earth, but I do think, if you want to focus on the last 20% of the game, where the team needed him to kind of step up and make the throws that they needed to potentially put themselves in a position to win the game, he was able to do that. But I also sort of think like, and again, I'm not blaming him for the reason why they lost the game, but certainly I think if he had played a little bit better in the first 80% of the game, that, things may have played out a little bit differently. But, there's promise with Penix, but he's still very much a work in progress, which I'm sure as many of the people are now yelling in their comments are like, he's a rookie, he's a second. Yeah, we know, but that confirmed on Sunday night.
And I'm not sure how many times you noticed it, but there were big play opportunities there. There were multiple plays where Kadero Hodge had to step downfield, particularly whether it was down the seam or they go up by the left hash. Like he missed them by a couple of feet. And then Darnell Mooney was getting open quite a bit. The chemistry wasn't quite there. Like other than Drake London, it just seemed like he didn't really have that great of a rapport with anyone else. Like I understand why, but Ray McLeod, there was like a team decision that he was like essentially benched for the first few drives. I don't know what infraction there was, but I think not having Ray McLeod maybe affected the offense a little bit. But you look at the numbers, like the Falcons were at one point 0 for 5 on third downs, and then you look at their efficiency against the Giants on third down. Like to me, 5 of Penix's best plays against the Giants were on third down. So that third down efficiency against Giants and then efficiency against the Commanders, I think makes a huge difference. But we do have to talk about the Kyle Pitts touchdown, though. What a bullet. And see a tight window throw in a high leverage situation at that moment, in a tight window, middle of the field. Those are the type of throws you really want to see from a young quarterback. Like looking at the all 22, how impressed were you with that throw? Because it was 4 verts from what I saw, correct?
Yeah, I think I'd have to double check, but yeah, that sounds right. Yeah, it was a good throw. Good catch from Kyle Pitts as well.
Oh, look at you! Look at you underselling it, man. That was a great moment, and you just
it was. Yeah. But like we can't celebrate anything that Kyle Pitts does on this podcast. We're not allowed to do that.
Oh man, poor guy.
He's a terrible human being, and
he's got great fashion sense, man. He left that locker room styling last night.
I just anything positive about Kyle Pitts on this podcast is not allowed. So
I do. All right. Excluding Kyle Pitts here, I do think that drive after the offense had ran 9 plays in the second half, like that drive to tie the game up was hugely impressive. Like the 3 throws to Drake London, I think each of them were 14 yards or more, including the 31-yard completion, and all those throws were outside the numbers. So big moments there for him, especially on a drive where he had to deliver for this team to have any chance.
Yeah, that's what I was referring to. That last 20%, like that last 20%. You focus on that's the thing that's very promising from this game, more so than the previous 80%. So yeah, I think Penix showed you a lot of the things that you wanted to see. The quote unquote ice water in his veins, that sort of thing. Maybe we'll call him Michael Penix.
No.
We're not going to do the ice puns with Penix like we did with the other quarterback.
Only if you're going to drink more Natty Lights.
Okay.
Also, I mentioned would you like to see him? Obviously, he needs to improve there, but throwing the middle of the field, I thought he was fortunate. Bobby Wagner didn't pick him off. It seemed like he didn't lead Bijan Robinson properly. That particular play, what did you see on the film there?
Yeah, I think he threw it behind Bijan on that particular play because I think he was worried because basically they ran 2 in-breakers and Bijan was running an option route. And so whichever way Bijan broke, and he broke towards Ray, he could have broke to the right and gone towards Kyle. It would have been a tight window throw either way, just because the in-breaking route from the 2 slot receivers and Ray and Pitts were bringing their cover guys towards the ball. So I think that led to Penix kind of trying to throw it behind Bijan in order to avoid the oncoming defender that would have had a chance to contest that ball. And that, I think, led to Bobby Wagner being able to break it up.
So somewhat similar to the big completion in Chris Blair in the previous game. Obviously, that was much more downfield, but he threw it behind Blair so to protect him from the incoming hit.
Yes. Yeah. But the big difference was Blair didn't have a defender
exactly
in his hip pocket that could have broken up that pass. Yeah, but basically the same thing.
Yeah. So overall, uneven performance, but a lot to be encouraged about, I think, with Michael Penix. And I do think he maybe can handle the pressure a little bit more. Like, I thought there was a lack of decisiveness when it comes to taking off. I thought there were 1 or 2 moments you would like to see him scramble to probably get 6 or 7 yards rather than 2 or 3 in those moments. But with more experience, I'm sure he will be operating with more conviction when there's no openings downfield and he needs to pick up quick yards in a make or break game.
There you go. So let's talk a little bit more about the Falcons getting completely outplayed in the second half, in addition to Raheem's coaching shortcomings, at least based off of a tweet from yours truly, Allen Strk.
That doesn't exist anymore, but okay.
Okay. So
terrible remark.
So we'll get into that to wrap up today's Locked On Falcons. So as I mentioned on Twitter, Allen on Monday evening tweeted out that the Falcons got completely outplayed in the second half, in addition to Raheem Morris's coaching shortcomings. And so I'm just curious, Allen, if you could elaborate on what you mean by that.
I mean, at one point, the Commanders ran 40 plays and the Falcons only ran 9. And I think it was like 9 minutes left in the fourth quarter. When a team has a 15-play drive and a 14-play drive. And yes, the D'Angelo Malone penalty, which would you agree made absolutely no sense at the time, or did you agree with it?
You mean made no sense that he committed the penalty, or that the refs threw the flag?
That the refs threw the flag. I didn't get that penalty at all.
It seemed to make sense to me. You're not allowed to contact the receiver 10 yards down the field, right? There's a rule, right?
But was it more than 10 yards?
I feel like it was.
Okay.
I'd have to go back and look at the film.
Yeah, and just to give listeners perspective, I actually was at a little bit of a disadvantage last night. So usually media, they sit in like the 300 area, you get the 50-yard line, you see the whole field view. The Commanders put you behind the end zone in like the 100 section. So you do not see the full field. So it was a bit of a challenge at times. They did this in 2018. I thought it was because the awful Dan Snyder wanted to put more of his friends in VIP suites, and he just doesn't care with the media. But it turns out the Commanders still do this. So not ideal. Don't know why they do it, but it did leave me at times. You're trying to figure out what kind of coverage are they running? What's the route distribution? So it was a little bit of an issue there. But no, look, ultimately, 15-play drive, 14-play drive, I thought it was probably the worst tackling performance, especially with the secondary. Like, I thought A.J. Terrell was stellar in coverage, but multiple times just leading with his shoulder, making plays that he routinely makes. Like, we're talking about one-on-one situations where there's no blockers in sight, and you expect him to go low, wrap up properly. And for Chris Rodriguez, just to bounce right off him was just inexcusable. D. Alford missed some tackles. Jesse Bates missed some tackles. It was ironically a lot from the secondary. Like, look, the front definitely got drained as the game went on. They weren't disengaged off their blocks. They weren't maintaining cap integrity. I think they really struggled when the Commanders were starting to use more RPOs. The first half they did well, but the second half I just thought they were all out of sorts. So it's just top to bottom. But I really do think the secondary let them down in moments where the tackling should have been better in one-on-one situations or even on third down, particularly with D. Alford and AJ Terrell.
Yeah, I think that's fair. The excuse is, Jaden Daniels has done that to every defense in the league so far this year. So, the Falcons aren't special in that regard. You can watch some of the runs he had last week against Philadelphia.
Oh, I did. But we're talking about Chris Rodriguez and the great Olamide Zaccheaus. Like, we're talking about making those plays in the open field.
That's fair.
Like, it's just, I don't know, we're not wrapping up. Like, I think PFF has that where they only made one tackle on the initial contact in the second half.
Okay. Yeah. Okay.
That's a sign of a very weary defense.
Yeah, I have no excuse for that one. So,
and this was one of Nate Landman's better games as well. Like Nate Landman actually
it was one of Nate Landman's better games. You're right.
JT Berger was getting involved. Like the Falcons defense, they had its moments. Like they didn't get completely overwhelmed, but it's just when you allow these long drives and the tackling is that atrocious, it's not acceptable. And look, I think AJ Terrell, we can both agree, he's had a fantastic year, but when you're getting paid like a premier corner, you have to deliver in these moments. I know I sound like a sports talk radio guy right now, but it's just these are the moments, these are the games. The reason why the team, thankfully they got the one stop to prevent not allowing 3 consecutive touchdown drives, but in the red zone, just that moment with Terrell and Chris Rodriguez, you have to make that play. There was a third down on an in-breaking route where it's like Jesse Bates and I think maybe D. Alford, and he's like 2 yards away from the first down marker, but then he doesn't finish the tackle. So it's just these little moments. And, because we could talk about the run game more, but did you think that just from the defensive front standpoint, whether they're playing as a bare front or, utilizing more, safeties in the box, maybe with Justin Simmons, what did you see from like pure run plays where the Falcons fell short in?
Well, I thought too many times in this game, especially in the second half when Washington started committing more to the QB run game, that the Falcons didn't do enough matching of personnel on some of those plays. And what I mean by that is like Washington would be in 12 personnel with 2 tight ends, and the Falcons would play nickel. And typically in the NFL, when teams are in 12 personnel, teams play base so that you can get better matches for numbers in the box because those are considered run. That's a run personnel grouping. And so what that ends up doing is when the Falcons play nickel in those situations, they have basically 7 guys to defend the run in a box. And Washington has 7 blockers plus the running back. And then when you throw the quarterback into the mix, you basically have 7 defenders that are basically asked to defend 9 guys. And it's basically impossible to do that unless, Aaron Donald is going to show up in the middle of the game and basically take out 3 blockers in one fell swoop. So that to me, I think, was a contributing factor to why Washington was able to get the run game going. And the reason I bring that up is because that was, to me, a frustrating thing during the middle portion of the season when the Falcons defense was struggling, that they kind of refused to match personnel. And I felt like one of the things that Jimmy Lake has done a much better job of since the bye week, and I think that's contributed to why the defense has played better, is that he's done a better job matching personnel. And I don't think it's not to say he didn't do it at all in the Washington game, but there were like that big 25-yard run that Jaden Daniels had, I think right before halftime. I think that was one of the instances where they did not match personnel. And basically once Jaden Daniels got outside, there was really nobody there to stop him because, they just didn't have enough bodies there.
Yeah, especially whether it was Judon or Lorenzo Carr, they were just put in situations that you just can't expect them to make a play there.
Yeah.
Did you think Onyemata was getting blown off the line of scrimmage quite a bit? I thought Sam Cosmi and Tyler Biadasz kind of got the better of him in moments.
Not particularly, but again, that may just be something, that has been an issue for Onyemata this year, especially dealing with double teams. So that may be something that stands out a little bit more when I go back and watch the film with a finer tooth comb.
Yeah, I was a little surprised Eddie Goldman didn't get more snaps because I think he's been a pleasant surprise since the bye week. They've given him more reps and he's held up at the point of attack. But maybe this was the type of game where, given what the Commanders, how much they like stretch runs, maybe just the personnel-wise, it didn't make sense to play it more. But I don't know. I feel like they were kind of pounding him inside, especially on those long drives.
I agree. I feel like I don't think it's a coincidence that the Falcons defense has played better these last couple of weeks with more Eddie Goldman in the lineup. So I agree with you on that.
So, yeah, second half, it's just, I feel like more times than not, this team is really disappointed in the second half. You look at the Vikings game. Of course, you look at the Broncos game, even though that game was kind of getting out of hand. But it's just, if you want to win these tight games or if you want to beat playoff caliber teams, kind of that second half is everything. And Raheem Morris kind of made his reputation of being this second half, not guru, but you saw the adjustments he made in key moments to help really elevate that Rams team from a couple of years ago to make them a playoff team. And it was really disappointing in that moment because I thought they played one of their best first halves of the season. Like, they really set the tone. They were running the ball really well. And I know it's hard to run the ball when you can't get on the field, but it's just, you saw the defense's limitations really show here. And when you have such an efficient, well-structured offense like the Commanders, if you can't get off the field, you're going to pay the price. And we saw that time and time again in the second half.
Yeah, I feel like, to me, Jaden Daniels kind of took over the game in the second half, and I don't think the Falcons really had a good answer for him. And it was disappointing because it was like, I don't know if the Falcons were going to have a good answer. It was one of the reasons why I did not go into that game expecting the Falcons to win, because I just didn't feel like they would have an answer for Jaden Daniels. And I think they did a good job in the first half keeping him contained. And then I think you talk about the second half adjustments, and it was notable to me that they interviewed Dan Quinn, right after halftime. And basically, he basically said, like, we're going to be fine. We know how to finish games. And they've shown that throughout the season. And you talk about the mid-game adjustments. That has been something that early, when the Falcons were more successful, that was something that you could say that was a big part of that early success. And as you mentioned, I think too many times in the back half of the season, those in-game adjustments, those mid-game adjustments did not come in the Falcons' favor. And that was a contributing factor to why, they're now looking on the outside, looking in terms of their playoff hopes.
I like that you did mention that they were doing this early in the year, because you were absolutely spot on. You look at the Eagles game, you look at the Thursday night against Tampa Bay, especially the Tampa Bay game, because they got lit up in that first half, but the second half, they really stepped it up there. So, yeah, I don't want to completely write off Raheem's abilities in the second half, because look, early in the season, they beat the Eagles and the Bucs. Those are their signature wins this year. So credit them there. But you look at the Steelers, Chiefs, Chargers, and now Commanders. We talk about 4 games against playoff opponents where they fell short, and you could pinpoint a lot of areas that doesn't involve Raheem Morris's situational mismanagement. We're talking about just lack of execution and players not producing in high leverage moments.
So, Alan, I want to wrap up with you here. You got to speak with some of the players after the game: Arnold Ebiketie, Drake London, Grady, Jarrett, Justin Simmons, maybe some others that I missed. Any interesting tidbits that you want to share? I know you wrote up about this over at the Falcoholic, or do you want to elaborate on before we duck out of here?
Justin Simmons in particular was pretty candid. He was talking about how since the bye week, because I wanted to ask, because I think the team's had 21 sacks since the bye week, so I wanted to get an idea of, like, where does this improvement come from? Is it more from a schematic standpoint, or just players stepping up? I wanted to learn from how the players are doing it. And Justin Simmons basically admitted that there's been more attention to detail with the coaching staff. So the coaches really had to sit down with the players and get on the same page. So it was pretty clear for watching the film early on. He said that they were not on the same page, and the simulate pressures and the blitzes were pretty vanilla. Like, you just saw schematically, like, teams were easily picking up on their twists and stuff. So I did like the fact that Justin Simmons admitted, it's like, yeah, we had to really sit down with the coaching staff and get more creative. And from a player standpoint, obviously play with more intensity, but coaching staff, they had to also contribute to making sure this team's generating more pressure. So, he did specify attention to detail, and, he did credit the Commanders for their execution. Nothing that really surprised him, but he talked about in the second half, it's just they were really good on 1st and 10s. And a team like that, when they're in second and manageable, they're very difficult to stop. And he said time and time again, like, those first downs are really hurting the defense, because Commanders, second shorts, it's like, okay, you can run RPOs here. You can take a shut down field because they were looking for that shot. AJ Terrell, Mike Hughes made some great plays, but the Commanders definitely were aggressive there. So Justin Simmons, and I don't know if this is a theme for me, but I find my best conversations with players are with safeties. Unfortunately, I didn't get to talk to Jesse Bates, but I've had some great conversations with Jesse Bates in the past. Ricardo Allen was fantastic back in the day, and Justin Simmons, just very articulate and someone who didn't shy away from, hold himself up like a true consummate professional, but actually giving us insight into how the team has definitely taken some strides in the second half of the year when it comes to at least generating pressure. I know there's been some blunders coverage-wise and stop the run, but there's no denying this team has done well when it comes to collapsing pockets and actually getting those key sacks.
Yeah. Well, Alan, anything you want to plug or share with the listeners before we get out of here?
I think at some point, probably next week, we'll do a round table. So you'll be on there with a bunch of people. Besides that, I mean, it's hard now. Season's likely going to be over Sunday. So I'm not sure, we're going to have to do some already long-term, bigger picture brainstorming ideas. But we'll see where it could go. Maybe I'll write something about Raheem Morris because it's such a polarizing topic at the moment. But besides that, nothing else really to plug.
Everything's polarizing with the Atlanta Falcons this year.
Look, this is my third time seeing Bijan Robinson live. There's nothing polarizing that man. That man is a superhuman. Oh my God, his footwork. Oof. I wish we could have. If they would have won, we could have dedicated a whole segment to Bijan Robinson. That first half. Ooh. Man. And that's your guy too, man. I know deep down you're so happy.
Yeah.
Bijan believer from day one. Even though it's not hard to be Bijan believer, but
like I said, there's two kinds of people in the world: people that are Bijan fans and people that haven't watched them play football yet. So that's
I just want to mention because I haven't done anything nostalgic yet. When I come on, I got to bring up some nostalgia.
Okay, what 2014 reference are you going to?
No, there's no reference here, but I just want to mention probably one of my favorite things about interviewing the players afterwards is that I got to talk to Grady Jarrett about reconnecting with Dan Quinn because Grady was great with his time, and it meant a lot to me to talk to Grady Jarrett. I actually have never interviewed Grady Jarrett, and I started covering the Falcons 2015. He came to the league in 2015. Somehow I've always missed Grady Jarrett, so to finally talk to him, albeit in very weird circumstances, coming off a devastating loss, it was cool for him to give us that time. And I got to talk to him about Dan Quinn. He just gave Dan Quinn, shared all the gratitude because they did earlier that day a walk for Greg Knapp. So some of the players also came through to that, and Grady Jarrett was get to have a moment with Dan Quinn because they've been through some real battles together, and Dan Quinn was the first NFL coach to truly believe in him, and he put him in the position to succeed. So they got that Super Bowl, that great Falcon team nostalgia. It was cool in that moment because, as you know, man, we were recording every day in that time, and we look back at those times as fond memories. So. And who knows about Grady Jarrett's future? Unfortunately, that might be one of his last games as a Falcon. So it was cool to at least talk to him then. And he did share some cool tidbits about Arnold Ebiketie as well, because I want to ask him what he thought about his emergence along with the pass rush as a whole. Grady, to me, is one of the best talkers on the team.
Okay, well, if next week is Grady Jarrett's last game as a Falcon, then I'm going to have some choice words for this organization this offseason. So people can look forward to that. So continue to make Locked On Falcons your first listen. On
Aaron Freeman does not care about the cap space. He just wants good players on the team.
I'm just saying, if they're going to cut Grady Jarrett, good luck to you, my guys. Good luck to you. But we'll see on that. Check out Locked On Falcons as your first listen on YouTube or wherever you listen to the podcast. Check out Locked On NFL, 2 shows daily, getting you the lowdown what's going on with the other 31 NFL teams. And Alan, again, always appreciate chopping it up with you about this team. And it's nice to talk to a reasonable, rational person about this team that isn't just all fire and brimstone whenever the Falcons lose. So I do appreciate that greatly, sir. And so,
but usually, don't you bring rational people on the show?
I try to, but these last couple of weeks haven't had too many guests on the podcast for a reason, to talk about recent games. So, it is what it is. But, that's it, guys. Check us out. Locked On NFL, Locked On Falcons, Locked On Sports Atlanta. It's all part of Locked On Podcast Network, your team every day.